Let's now move on to employee sentiment and risk insights, more on risk, as we've just been hearing here in Peadar. We're joined now by Tim Evans, who's co-founder of Truthsayers. Tim.
So folks, we're going to change tack slightly here. We're going to build on what Barbara was talking about on that external insight coming into the organisation and switch it around a bit and think about your internal key stakeholders, your employees. And really the key thing I want you to take away from the next 4 minutes or so is caught up in this statement here in yellow on the left, that what people say and how they feel are often very different. And unfortunately, there are fundamental flaws with traditional survey and assessment methods that we all know and love, those that ask questions and give you a range of answers, because unfortunately, they provide you far more with what people say than what they feel. And given the situation that we are in today with COVID-19, your employees may well be suffering in silence, but it'll be very difficult for you to be able to see that. You've probably all seen before the iceberg of ignorance here in the middle. Now that's a challenge in normal business as usual times for organizations, but massively amplified when you start to look at something like COVID-19. Because if there ever was a time that you wanted to be acting on that information that was accurate and consistent, that time is right now. Now, we'd even argue in Truthsayers that the poor percent of problems, of risks and issues that executives are aware of at the top table, even those are wholly or partly inaccurate and inconsistent. So what this means really is that leaders are focusing on the wrong issues, priorities and decisions, which when you start to think about mental health, social isolation, coping with change in your employees, and the fact that you're having to change operating models and business models on the fly, potentially leaders are missing out on vital cues and vulnerabilities and key risks in their organization. And we know there are going to be major behavioral changes that come through from COVID and the repercussions after it for governments and businesses alike. So if you want to be able to successfully navigate that iceberg and actually unpack what's underneath the water as well, the only way you can solve it quickly and at scale is to use different methods, neuro methods that capture data from people as it emerges. And the powerful thing about these neuro methods as opposed to traditional assessment methods is that they bypass the conscious bias and moderation that people generally answer surveys and assessments with and measure how they really feel. So what you're getting is this unbiased and accurate feedback. And if you think about that, when we go back to thinking around mental health, the social isolation, the coping with change, and these differences in operating models that are being changed on the fly, the benefits you get from having far more accurate information coming as a feedback loop from your employees to the leadership teams is that you have much more of an early warning system in place. So it allows you to avoid some of these stresses that employees are going through, and it allows you to more accurately measure these impacts on operational changes that you're making. So not only do the leadership team have much more confidence in the decisions they're taking and making sure they're not going off on some sort of vector and focusing on the wrong issues, but also they can measure accurately how much confidence employees and other key stakeholders have in the decisions they are taking themselves. And if you look it through a couple of other lenses as well, we're going to go into even more unprecedented times around the level of regulation and compliance needed around the conduct risk relating to things like the COVID-19 scenario. So being able to very accurately ensure adherence to those conduct risk laws and protocol that you're putting in place with your organizations is going to be increasingly significant. And then if you put your commercial hat on for a moment, you've also got the whole financial aspect around insurance and liabilities and premiums and managing those exposures. Well, again, if you can better understand on a more accurate level how your employees are feeling, you've got a better chance of navigating those situations as well. The great thing about neuro assessment methods, above all, is the fact that it's giving you quantitative metric-based data about people's feelings. So I'll just say that again because it needs to really land. It's quantitative metric-based data about people's feelings and attitudes. So what you're really getting at is the ability to apply much more powerful analytics tools and techniques on top of that data. So you can very quickly and easily see which areas you need to fix and amplify, which areas you need to triage before they get any worse as part of your early warning planning. You can get cohort heat maps produced that allow you to see by location or your functions or your teams where areas are struggling and in which aspects they are struggling, which allows you to tailor far more than you've been able to before the different response plans by those different cohorts. And because it's metric data, it also allows you to apply correlation analytics on top of that as well. So you can start to see the relationships between different aspects of the business. And I'll give a great example of that with one tech risk firm in London that we've been speaking to recently and working with. And what they were finding is that actually there were some challenges around not only the trust in the leadership team, but also they found out to the levels of stress that the employees were feeling going through this seismic and significant change to them in their operating model and the way that they worked. And what we were able to show them through the correlation analytics was that relationship really between the mental stresses that were going on and the fact that communication around change was a challenge for the organization. And of course, us as being human beings, what do? We fill in the blanks unless we're communicated to in the right way. So part of their reaction off of that and their forward action planning was to get much, much better with communicating the changes and what's going on to their employees. It allowed them to start thinking about what they need to do in upskilling their employees, their managers and the leaders around coping with change. And lo and behold, what that helped with was managing down and mitigating the stresses around mental health in the workplace for the individuals in the organization, but it also helped build more confidence and trust in the leadership team as well. And of course, because you can do this on a global scale, it means you can almost heat map where those hotspots are across different countries or across different cities in the countries. And again, it allows you to start to understand the scale of the challenge and where you need to organize your resources to focus on those priority areas. A lot of these neurotech methods are now SaaS platforms. This is our version here. And the great thing again about these assessment methods is they're much, much faster. They're more like an online game than a long bloated questionnaire that you fill out normally. So a lot of the surveys can be completed well within 10 minutes. And because it's digitally enabled, it can be deployed to any device, anytime, anywhere in the world. It can be provided as surveys or assessments in different languages. So it's multilingual. And of course, because we're talking about doing this type of thing en masse, it's cloud-based. So it's scalable, it's secure, and it's anonymous. And because you don't just want to focus right up front and pick up true north, i.e. what that true picture is that you're starting from, these sorts of platforms are designed for easy repeat testing. So you can track, monitor, and course correct for the different hotspots you're finding over time. And I guess if there's one final thing I'd ask you to take away, it's the plain and simple fact that all progress starts with the truth. We know we're going through unprecedented times now. So if ever we wanted to start with a true picture and understand what we don't just do to firefight and put out these fires over the coming 6 to 8 weeks, but how we cope as individuals, as organizations, and as markets going forward, coming out of the initial COVID-19 crisis. And if you want to minimize irreparable damage to your people and your business, then you've got to start with and monitor forward the truth.
I've got one question here from Ranjan from Asturias Holdings. Tim, picking up on that point about how you keep people real-time aware and agile as well.
Yeah, so I think, and so it's very easy to deploy any sort of test or survey that you want very quickly to the area you want to and get that feedback real time. So after 5 responses, you can start to see what the insights are telling you all the way through to the end of the survey or assessment when it gets closed off. And of course, because you can deploy that in different languages across different time zones, you're getting that information coming through real time across all those different demographics.
Let's move on now to the final set of thoughts about dynamic crisis response. Dynamic crisis response and how you coordinate it. We're joined by Nigel Hopkinson, who who's head of EMEA for Groupdolists. Nigel.
Thank you, Nick. Hello, everyone. Very pleased to be here today. We believe there's a transformation underway within crisis management, and that the old model of gathering a group of experts in a room with paper plans cannot mitigate for high velocity risks, whether they be cyber attacks or pandemics. So, as in all aspects of modern life, organizations are trying to use technology to help them respond. But conventional technologies will only help up to a point. Email, texting, messaging apps, and even phone calls are what people know, but they are not necessarily suited to deal with widespread, complex crises. The more you use them, the more fragmented communications become, and more sources can mean more overload. Decision-making becomes impaired. So, if you're looking to use technology to help you establish command and control, you should think about the following issues. Your response plan. Interesting to get James's comments earlier from Marsh, but most organizations have these in some form, but they are very quickly outdated and not readily adaptable to dynamic circumstances or to an evolving group of stakeholders. How do you mobilize the right people at the right time and know that they're engaged? How do you coordinate them? How do you gain constant visibility into their actions? How do you communicate with them in real time? And how do you keep your stakeholders informed every step of the way? And are you able to capture an accurate audit trail of your response for analysis later? Those are some of the challenges. I would say that Groupdolists has thought about these challenges and designed a cloud-hosted crisis management platform that works across mobile and web clients. It's effective because of its inherent simplicity. If you can use an iPhone, you can use this platform. So Groupdolists will empower you and your team to establish real-time command and control. It will allow you to mobilize the right people in seconds and equip them with interactive plans and tasks to fulfill their role, and it will help you coordinate all relevant information centrally to share progress with your leadership team and have full auditability after the event. What I have for you now is a 90-second video which will help you visualize the workflow and how this works.
The velocity of unexpected disruptions is occurring at an unprecedented pace. Groupdolists provides real-time command and control the second you need it from any device anywhere. Simply open the app and access your list of incident-specific procedures. Activate your response team, then instantly push procedures down into their mobile devices. Completed tasks immediately synchronize across the team, keeping everyone updated. New tasks can be created, then assigned on the fly. Convene a conference bridge and start talking about the incident. Simply tap to join with no dialing required. Create situational awareness by starting an incident log. Add locations, links, media, and files. Team awareness is immediate and seamless. Access leading emergency notification providers, seamlessly integrated. There's even an audit trail, which automatically keeps a chronological record of all team activity. Great for after-action reporting and improving performance. Always available access means no dependencies on your existing network, since our service is hosted and secure in the AWS cloud. Welcome to the next big idea for response teams. Groupdolists, response reinvented.
Thank you, Nigel. Let me just pick up on that point from Sakib Sake, if I can, particularly about an example about how this technology is currently being adopted by organizations, how it's proved effective in current scenarios.
Good question, Nick. Yes. Well, the way it's designed, it's being used by small, medium enterprises now. One of the reasons they've adopted it is because they can get it up and running within days. But the use cases are expanding now across larger organizations as well. So we've got the world's largest energy company is using it globally. And most recently, the US Senate has signed up to use it as well. So it's being used globally.
Right, let me just pick up 3 or 4 questions now before we go to particular demos from each of the speakers. A lot of them are actually very technical about how you create revenue and so on, as opposed to the kind of overarching principles of things have got to change very quickly. But let me ask about the issue particularly raised by Johan Julia. You've asked a question about how do you assess multicultural aspects of this. In other words, we're a webinar which is going across multiple cultures. How much there are multicultural issues which have to be addressed. In other words, is it one size fits all or one principle fits all?
I think, Nick, it's Tim Evans here from Truthsayers. I think if I look at it from some of the work we've done pre-COVID, because obviously we've got multilingual surveys and assessments, we find it's very much sitting down with the individual teams and seeing and almost applying that global view to it. So you'll always have the organisation's umbrella view of its own cultures and values, but then you've got to drop down and think about what are the cultural aspects that are particular to that region or that particular demographic. And it's then starting to spot what are the differences between the demographics. So is it, for example, that managers in this area are doing something and it's working in a way that could be applied over there? Or culturally, is that not going to be something that's appropriate? And I think you have to get down to that level of detail when you're working through with the management and leadership teams to figure out what the action plans are coming off the back of that initial insight.
Then on another question from Mohammed, I don't know your surname, about the way that the government stimulation packages we're seeing in many countries, though not all, how much the kind of things that you're all putting on the agenda are actually going to be affected or modified by the current stimulant economic packages being released by governments, because it's creating a new set of variables for survival.
I think you have to find a way of asking global questions and getting answers locally. So, for example, you need to, a term that I liked there from James, from Marsh, what is that single record of truth? So when we tie in with Barbara, for example, and we know that each day we're going to get a single message that reflects data inputs, credible data inputs from around the world, we can then say, look at what the world is predicted to have to do in the next 24 hours. And then finding out, okay, what questions now can we ask of our local leadership across countries? The technology, don't worry about the technology. The technology is there. But you have to know what questions to ask, and tapping into what's going on around the world and predicting what might happen in terms of actions and so forth in the next 24 hours is not all that challenging. And translating that then to local facts is the key.
What we want to do now is hear a little bit more demos from each of the speakers to try and underpin much of what you've been saying and give examples as well. And I should tell you, there is one question, an interesting question, which I'd like you to just bear in mind from Adil. In this COVID-19, where things are totally in lockdown, how can we increase business revenue? That at a time when so many people are losing business revenue.
On my screen, you are seeing a daily global aggregate activity level for a number of issues. Because of the topic of this call, we're going to focus on the column on the left, the COVID-19 column, but we could explore in other areas as well. So this is automatically analyzed, and it does the information triage for the user. Because if at the end of the day, what you really care about is what did government do that maybe you didn't know about, because you were in a meeting, because your team was putting out a fire, because it happened overnight, what you want to do is go immediately to action. It is interactive. It's delivered by email as well as any other mechanism. And this shows the power of the information triage. You can precisely define what kind of COVID activity you want to be seeing every day. Our system follows not just keywords, but combinations of keywords. For purposes of the demo, we're going to focus on the top performing just to get some more information. You'll see, by the way, that we cover two different versions. Coronavirus tends to be the term policymakers are using in a general way. COVID-19 tends to be the term they use when they are looking to do something And again, this shows you more information triage opportunities. The system has automatically identified what kind of activity occurred, and then you can choose to see whether, did you know that a meeting was happening? If not, you might want to go look and see what the meeting was, the report might be. In the interest of time, I'm going to go to the search function just so people have a better sense of the scope of this. And otherwise, I would drill down farther and show more. And this is going to generate a time series. Now, it only goes down because we only have a few observations. We're at the beginning of April, and I searched March to April. So we're going to go to the detailed view of March. And this shows you a detailed reaction function. So remember, COVID-19 is the term policymakers use when they're doing something very technical. And it turns out they take a lot more action than they talk about when they're using the term COVID-19 as opposed to coronavirus. Every one of these components every one of these dots is interactive. So if you or one of your senior analysts or strategists want to drill down farther, you can. You can see from this screen that the coverage is indeed global. It's not just Canada and the UK. So the scope of coverage is quite significant. The point is that in any given 24-hour period, it is crucially important to understand the reaction function that occurred the 24 hours around a big decision, being able to identify precisely a technical activity, whether that's from the momentum chart or from the time series chart, provides you and your clients with an informational advantage.
Thank you, Barbara. Peadar, the floor is yours, quickly on a demo.
Thank you. Nick, you've asked for case studies, and I saw an earlier question from somebody earlier on the webinar about how do you funnel, I think that was the question, how do you funnel information from the front line back? So let's just think about what do we do in the traditional way of gathering information. We meet people, we interview them, we workshop and so forth. But we can only get around to 10, 20 or 30 people at a time. And if you're in an organization of 50 or 100,000 people, then clearly that small snapshot of understanding is just not good enough. We then go back to our machines and we put facts to Excel spreadsheets, which are basic kind of algorithms, you could say, and then we generate reports. So think about that now. So here we have a simple assessment that we send out to people on what we call an anonymous link. So let's say this morning we signed off on a task we were given by a major supply chain and IT services provider. They want to run supply chain impact assessments across their top 10 accounts. Strangely enough, within each one of those major behemoth 10 companies, nobody has end-to-end visibility of their supply chain at the tier 1 level, and they're absolutely blind to the next level down. So we said, well, let's run these assessments on an anonymous link. You don't care where it ends up, so long as a person completes the assessment. We don't know, quite frankly, whether we're going to have 500 or 5,000 responses by the end of this week. My point here is the technology is not the challenge. It's how you introduce it to organizations and to real people. That's the challenge. So here you have an example of a person, Peadar. He's in Europe, Ireland. Paris is the only facility you have in Europe. I'm working in Ireland, remote working. I'm in the customer services department. Let's say I'm in operations. I now have, these are the questions based on, for example, some output from Marsh or some output from BCM. I want to ask a global question locally. So what impact has COVID-19 had on my capability? How do I prioritize, allocate available supply for fulfillment? And I can decide what particular questions I'm going to answer here. So natural free language. Why natural free language? Because you can buy machines very competitively these days that would simply read my language. And instead of having to, load in my taxonomy, I know that certain words are used across the world. Different words are used across the world to describe the same thing. So while I can go up to 200 or 4,000 characters here, I say something and I'm asked, what's my ability to demonstrate what I've just said? I've got limited ability to demonstrate, or I'm able to demonstrate. It's a simple 1 to 5 scale, right? Notice I don't ask any questions like, what's the likelihood of something happening? We're living in a world today where you can no longer estimate likelihood. That day is gone. That axis on the register is just gone. What is the impact? Well, I've a range of impacts here. In the case of this particular organization, this was the range of impacts they were interested in. Is it reputation, is it operations or finance? What's the potential impact in my observation, right? I'm trying to get to a number here overall, right? Is it going to be significant, massive? And you'll notice that we're using basic language. This organization uses SWOT, does it relate to an opportunity or a weakness, or is it from the outside, is it a threat? And typically, what are the range of decisions I'm going to make? Am I going to accept and continue with this situation? Am I going to stop and avoid possible impacts? Am I going to follow an action plan? Whatever my option here, I go straight into action planning. Again, natural free language, who's going to do it, how there is, how many weeks am I going to get it done by, and so forth. Now, this is the key point here. Neurotechnology. Do people really believe what they're saying in a system? Because online surveys and assessments are notorious for not being quite certain that people believe what they're actually telling us. On a scale of 1 to 5, they might pick 3 and so forth. So we scrape information here, turn it into an affirmation, put it into the neurotech box in Truthsayers, and we find out whether or not what people are saying in natural free language here is what they really believe on the neurotech. What are the outputs? What do they look like? So here's an example of the type of questions. The size of a bubble reflects the number of responses or files that we have. Can you fill my order from a different site, and so forth. You hear on the top right-hand portion the exact output data that mirrors the input that you saw a moment ago. And by the way, I hope you noticed on the right-hand side that the way in which things render on a mobile phone, for example, as an example of a mobile device. So this is the kind of information that you will get out once you've put the information in. The key here is, as experts, the audience that we're talking to here, making sure that you're very clear about what question you want to get out, because that will influence the shape of the question that you ask people to respond to as they're putting it in. The drop-down values allows you to slice and dice the data. All of that is incredibly easy and straightforward once you're shown how. This is the kind of output data that you can get, and you can drill down and so forth. Another view of the exact same information is this kind of a view, where I can toggle and it changes the shape of my picture. And the point I want to make here is I don't want to get stuck into the functionality of the machine here. But once you get the data in, you can do beautiful things with it. So all you really have to understand is we already know as experts what questions we want to ask. You just simply have to understand how to digitalize those questions such that people will answer them. It must be in less than 5 or 10 minutes. You've got to be wary of the fact that perhaps we need to be very certain that they really believe what they're saying. And so we'll run it through neurotech as well. And finally, I'll show you risk register. You know, I'm somewhat biased here. I'm very involved internationally with, for example, James from Marsh. I did the design spec for the revision of the global guidance on risk management, which was released in 2018. I don't like risk registers because they don't do what they were originally intended to do. Just consider for a moment now the value of the information you get on a risk register. How does that help a person to make a better decision? Because that is what risk management is all about. All we're here to do, and I'll conclude on this point, is to add to this kind of information here, add to the quality of thinking, add to the quality of discussion, and as a result of that then, add to the quality of decision making at the other end. So I hope that has been in some way helpful. I can see from a report I got just a moment ago that from release this morning, we have a couple of hundred responses in from 2 of the channels that this customer of ours asked us to release. And it was the challenge was overcome by simply realizing all we have to do is release an anonymous link through various organizations. We don't care where it ends up, so long as we get the responses. So you have to be innovative. We got to try new ways of doing things such that we can keep pace with daily changes.
Tim from Truthsayers, any thoughts, please?
Folks, you'll remember earlier I was showing some static images of the analytics you can get out of the neurotech platform. So very quickly, depending on what inputs you put in as data, you can slice and dice the views and insights. You have different phases depending on whether or not you have run the surveys, assessments, or diagnostic tools more than once. And then very quickly, to give you a flavour, here is the quartile picture of key conclusions that was in the middle of the slide deck earlier. So you can see in this case, for all participants in this organisation, things they need to fix, things they need to triage that are going down, and the good news stories, stuff that is working and they need to continue to champion, because that's the other side of employee morale. We are very granular in our data. So here's the detailed analysis. So for every dimension in our COVID-19 tool that's out of the box and the statements that are part of our Neuro method, you can see here the scores and the changes from the previous phase. And also the blue thumbs up, that's our machine learning in the background running and calculating the stability and predicting forward the responses that are coming through. I will also show you, if you remember earlier, we talked about the correlation analytics, where we are correlating one statement with another. So this is where you get down into some of the really laser focused detailed stuff. So example there, very positive correlation between my company handles change well and I can talk openly to my manager, which might seem like an obvious thing, but in the noise and fuss of the situation and the way organizations work, it's always it's more difficult to spot the signal in the noise. There's your heat map across all the cohorts by the different dimensions of this particular tool. So you can see where you need to focus more of your effort. And obviously that picks up and looks at the score in a geographic breakdown as well. I won't go into any more detail than that. All of this is available to look at. Right, so in 20 seconds, you'll remember I said traditional methods, we ask questions and give people a range of answers. We don't do that on the Neuro method. What we do is flash up a series of statements, after which either the word yes or no appears. It's like a game, it's task orientated. So I have my fingers over the E key on my keyboard for yes and the I key for no. I'm just going to do a few statements here. Statements will flash up on the screen, and all I have to do is press as quickly as I can the corresponding key on my keyboard for the yes or the no that appears after the statement on the screen. That is what is bypassing conscious bias without going into the deep neuroscience, and that is what is ensuring that you have unmoderated, accurate feedback.
My goodness, that really addresses the stresses and strains that so many people are feeling in so many institutions that's providing they're still there during COVID-19. Thanks for that, Tim. Let me go to Ray Nulty. Ray, do you want to just summarize before we hear from Nibras, who is from Adam Global?
So very quickly, it's really important that we take this opportunity now, obviously to put out our fires, but in pretty quick order, we need to reimagine our business. There are a lot of opportunities that people are taking advantage of now during this period through digitization. We've seen it in many organizations already, the launch of digital gyms, the launch of digital healthcare, and so on and so forth. We've also heard that the risk management processes have failed us. So we really need to shift not only the risk paradigm, but also the strategy paradigm. And I'd also say that, we really have to focus on inspiring our customers, our suppliers, our employees, and all the key stakeholders. And we have to look at actually how we collaborate going forward. We really need to take a new approach to that. I think unless we forget, as business people, we can make a fundamental difference to this war. By getting our businesses up and running to respond to COVID-ready states, and by reorientating them, we play a really important role in helping save livelihoods, indeed helping to protect lives, and very importantly, to make this world a much better and safer place for us.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. What a great session it has been. Just want to inform all our participants today what we have tried to do with Stratagem Partners, Adam Global and Stratagem Partners is that to bring tech platforms together and bring the synergy for our organizations and even the government entities across the world. So what we have seen today impact our businesses and have a great result for us individually as well as a whole. The responsibility vested upon me is to convey our thanks for all the participants, the presenters, especially among the participants, we are Adam Global Network members. We have a lot of our clients joining in, Adam Consulting clients. We have our friends, family members, and also BNI members from UAE joining in. Thank you all. We look forward to sharing more details about today's individual as well as collaborative effort on your emails. Back to you, Dr. Nick.
I can just add my appreciation as well. It's been a very intense hour and a half, and we are 2 minutes over, which is pretty good for having so many involved. There are a lot of other questions, a significant number of other questions, which were very technical about COVID-19 and particularly about the business challenges. So that's why they are available, but we haven't managed to answer them because actually they weren't quite focused on what we were trying to do, which was to broaden your ideas about how things can change and how much things can change. So thank you very much indeed on behalf of Stratagem Partners and also Thinking the Unthinkable, and to all of you at Adam Global for hosting us in this way, and I speak, I'm sure, and wish you a safe day, and one has to say that these days given the enormity of what we're all facing. Bye-bye.